The rain hammered against the windows as Jessica sat at her small kitchen table, staring at the ad she'd found in the local newspaper. The ink was smudged, and the paper was wrinkled from being folded for too long, but the words still stood out to her like a neon sign in the dark. Looking for someone to take care of an injured man. Compensation guaranteed. It was one of those ads that could either be a lifeline or a trap, but she didn't have many options left. Her rent was overdue, and the bills were piling up. She had always been proud of her independence, but now, standing on the edge of desperation, this seemed like her only chance. The idea of caring for a stranger didn't sit well with Jessica at first. She had heard too many horror stories of people getting involved in situations they couldn't escape from. But the pay was more than enough to cover her bills, and then some. Her gut told her to walk away, but her mind weighed the pros and cons, and for the first time in weeks, she saw a glimmer of hope. She picked up the phone and dialed the number listed in the ad, her heart racing as the line clicked on. A deep voice answered, smooth but distant. "Hello, Jessica. I've been expecting your call." How did he know her name? The question barely had time to settle in her mind before he continued. "I'll need you to be here by tomorrow morning. It's a big commitment, but I'm sure you'll find the reward worth your while." That night, sleep didn't come easy. Jessica tossed and turned, the promise of money swirling in her thoughts, mingling with the unease in her chest. She tried to imagine the man she would be caring for, an injured millionaire, the ad said. She had no idea what kind of injuries he had, or even who he really was. The voice on the phone had been calm, but something about it seemed too controlled, almost as if he was hiding something. Still, she needed this. The next morning, she found herself outside a large gated estate, its walls towering over her, casting shadows on the otherwise sunny day. The door opened before she even had the chance to ring the bell. A man, dressed in a tailored suit, greeted her with a polite but cold smile. His eyes were dark and unreadable. "Come in," he said, his voice warm but lacking genuine warmth. Jessica hesitated for just a second before stepping inside. The house was impressive, luxurious in every way, with gleaming marble floors and chandeliers that seemed to glow even in the daylight. But there was something about the place that felt off. The silence was almost suffocating, and the air, while cool, felt heavy with something unspoken. "Your charge is upstairs," the man said, his voice snapping her out of her thoughts. "He's in a room at the end of the hall. Follow me." Jessica nodded, swallowing her unease as she followed him up the stairs. The walk down the hallway felt long and drawn out, and as they reached the door, the man turned to her. "I'm sure you know your responsibilities, but just to be clear, do not enter his private space unless instructed. Understand?" "Yes," Jessica replied, the hairs on the back of her neck standing up. The door creaked open, and Jessica stepped inside. The room was dimly lit, and at first, she couldn't make out much. Then her eyes adjusted, and she saw him, lying motionless, in a large king-size bed. His face was pale, his features sharp, and his dark hair was tousled, as if he'd been bedridden for days. The sight of him made her pause. He was handsome, in a rugged, almost untouchable way. But there was a coldness to him even in his current state. She couldn't help but wonder what kind of man he truly was. "Mr. Weston," she whispered, uncertain of the protocol. His eyes fluttered open at the sound of her voice, locking onto hers with a sharp, calculating gaze. "You're here," he said softly, but there was no warmth in his tone. "I assume you've read the agreement." "Yes," Jessica replied, her voice steady, despite the tension in the room. "Good," he said, You may begin your duties immediately. I expect perfection." There was something about the way he said it that sent a chill through her. It wasn't the kind of request one might make when someone is truly in need. It was a demand, a command. Jessica tried to shake off the feeling that had started to creep up her spine, but it was hard to ignore. She had been hired to take care of him, and that's exactly what she planned to do. As the days passed, Jessica took care of his needs, feeding him, administering his medication, and helping him through physical therapy. But each day revealed something new. Despite his injuries, there was an air of power about him, a presence that seemed to dominate the room, even when he was weak. And there was something else, a secret hidden behind his guarded words and cold demeanor. Jessica couldn't put her finger on it, but she could feel it. The longer she stayed, the more she found herself drawn into the mystery surrounding this man. One evening, while she was arranging his medication on the bedside table, she noticed something strange, an envelope hidden under his pillow. It was sealed with an insignia she didn't recognize, one that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. Her curiosity got the better of her, and before she could stop herself, she picked it up and examined it. As she held it, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. What was in that envelope, and why had it been hidden from her? Was it a secret that would unravel everything she thought she knew about this man? Or was it a danger she wasn't ready to face? Before she could open it, a voice broke through the silence. "You shouldn't have touched that." Her heart skipped a beat. She turned around slowly to find Mr. Weston, watching her from the doorway, his eyes dark and unreadable once more. The room seemed to shrink around her, and in that moment, Jessica realized that everything she thought she understood was about to be turned upside down. Jessica's breath caught in her throat as Mr. Weston stepped into the room. His gaze locked onto the envelope she had foolishly picked up. Her fingers trembled, and she felt a flush of guilt creep up her neck. For a moment, it felt as though time itself had stopped. The quiet tension between them was palpable, and she could feel her pulse racing in her ears. "Why?" she managed to whisper, her voice shaky. "Why did you hide this?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked over to the bed and sat down, his movements deliberate, as if he were measuring each step. Jessica felt an unease settle in her stomach, and the air around her seemed to grow heavier. What was so important about this envelope, and why had he reacted so strongly? There was something more to him than just a wealthy man recovering from an injury. "You don't understand," he said finally, his voice low and almost weary. "This isn't just about my recovery. It's about my family, and the legacy I'm tied to." His words hung in the air, and Jessica's curiosity deepened. She had suspected there was more to him than met the eye, but now she was certain. But before she could press him further, he continued, his tone turning darker. "My name isn't just Weston. It's Clark Weston," he said, the words heavier than she expected. "I come from a powerful family, and I was in line to inherit everything until everything went wrong. The accident wasn't an accident. It was a warning I'm still trying to understand." Jessica felt her heart sink as she processed his words. A powerful family, an inheritance, an accident that wasn't accidental. It was like something out of a thriller, but it was real and dangerous. She had thought she was simply taking care of a man in need, but now it seemed like she had been drawn into something much bigger than she could have imagined. "You want me to believe this? That someone tried to kill you?" Jessica asked, her voice betraying the skepticism she felt. She had seen enough crime shows to know how things worked, but she hadn't expected this kind of complexity in her own life. His expression hardened, his jaw clenched. I don't care if you believe me, but there are people out there who would do anything to get to what I have. My family's fortune is tied to things most people could never understand. The wealth, the power. It's dangerous. Jessica took a step back, trying to digest everything he was saying. She wasn't sure if she was more scared for herself or for him, but she knew one thing for sure. Her life had just become entangled in something far beyond what she could handle. She had been hired to care for him, to help him recover, but now she had become part of his world. Whether she wanted to or not. "You need to leave," he said, his voice sharp. "There's too much at stake. I shouldn't have brought you here. But now that you're involved, you're in danger too." For a moment, Jessica felt a wave of panic wash over her. Leave? How could she leave now, when everything had already taken such a twisted turn? Her life had been messy before, but this was something else entirely. She thought of the money, the freedom it promised, but now it seemed insignificant in comparison to the dangerous situation she had just walked into. But then something inside her clicked. She couldn't back out now. There was no way she could leave, not with the knowledge she had, not with the mystery unfolding before her eyes. She wasn't sure why, but she felt like she had to help him. Something about his words, about the vulnerability that flickered in his eyes for just a moment, made her question everything she thought she knew about him. "I'm not leaving," she said, her voice steady now, though her hands still trembled. "I'm not just going to walk away, not after everything you've told me." Clark Weston stared at her, his eyes narrowing slightly, as if he were trying to decide whether to trust her or not. Then, without a word, he reached under his pillow and pulled out the envelope she had almost opened earlier. It was sealed tightly, and for the first time, he didn't seem like the powerful, calculating man she had come to know. He looked lost, as if the weight of his own secrets was too much to bear. "This," he said, holding up the envelope, "is the key. It holds everything you need to understand what's really going on. But opening it will change everything. You'll never be the same again." Jessica stared at the envelope, her mind racing. Was this her chance to uncover the truth? Or was it too dangerous? She had already taken a step into a world she didn't belong in, but now the choice was hers. Would she dare to open the envelope, knowing that doing so might pull her deeper into a web of lies, betrayal, and danger? Her hand moved almost involuntarily toward the envelope, her fingers brushing against the cool, waxy seal. She hesitated for only a moment, but in that instant, she felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her. Was she ready to face whatever was hidden inside? Or was she about to make a mistake that would cost her everything? Before she could make her move, the sound of a door opening down the hall shattered the silence. Clark's eyes flashed with panic. He quickly shoved the envelope back under his pillow, his expression now hardening once again. "Stay here. Don't move," he ordered in a whisper. Jessica froze. The urgency in his voice was unlike anything she had heard from him before. She didn't move a muscle, as footsteps echoed down the hallway, growing louder with each passing second. Who was coming? And why was he so terrified? The door creaked open and a figure stepped into the room, one she hadn't expected to see. It was a woman, tall and elegant, with an air of confidence that was both intimidating and familiar. She looked at Jessica with a gaze that was cold, calculating, and full of judgment. "Clark," she said, her voice smooth and commanding. "You're still hiding things. You know it's time." Clark's face paled, and for the first time, Jessica saw him falter. There was something about the woman that seemed to strip away the facade he had carefully constructed. What was going on here? Who was she? And why did she have so much power over him? The tension in the room was unbearable. and Jessica's mind raced with questions she wasn't sure she wanted the answers to. Jessica's heart pounded as she watched the woman step into the room, her cold gaze locking onto Clark with an intensity that sent a chill down Jessica's spine. The air was thick with tension, and for a moment, it felt like everything in the room was on the verge of unraveling. The woman's presence was commanding, and the way Clark's face twisted with unease only confirmed that she was someone important, someone dangerous. "Clark," the woman said again, her voice calm, yet unwavering. "You can't hide it anymore. The truth is out, and it's time to face the consequences." Clark's eyes flickered to Jessica, and in that instant, Jessica understood. He wasn't just hiding from the world. He was hiding from something far more sinister. A shiver ran through her as she realized she had stumbled upon something much bigger than herself. Her simple job of caring for an injured man had now entangled her in a web of secrets, power, and threats. "You don't understand," Clark said, his voice cracking for the first time, a rare crack in his usually composed demeanor. "They won't stop until it's too late. I've already lost too much." The woman's lips curled into a smirk. "And you think you can protect her? Protect yourself? It's over, Clark." Jessica felt a rising sense of dread in her chest, but she stood her ground. She had already come this far. She wasn't going to back down now. "What is this? What's going on?" she demanded, her voice trembling but determined. Clark's eyes met hers, and for a brief moment, she saw the vulnerability she had missed in the days leading up to this. He wasn't just the wealthy, powerful man he appeared to be. He was a man on the run, a man who had been fighting for his life, and for the life of those he cared about. Even if he didn't show it, the secrets he had been hiding weren't just about money or power. They were about survival. He took a deep breath before speaking again, his voice quieter this time. "This woman, her name is Evelyn. She's my sister. Or at least, she used to be." Evelyn's smile faded, replaced by a sharp, almost predatory expression. "Don't lie to her, Clark. We both know who you really are." Jessica's mind spun. What was he talking about? Sister? Lies? She was drowning in confusion. Clark, who she had thought was a helpless man, just trying to survive after an accident, now seemed to be tangled in a web of betrayal that reached back into his past. "Clark," Evelyn said, taking a step closer to him, "you don't get to pretend anymore. You know what you did. You know why they're after you. You've betrayed your own family for the last time." A sudden realization hit Jessica like a punch to the gut. You're not just hiding from some enemies. You're hiding from your own family. The same family you were supposed to inherit from. You betrayed them, didn't you? Clark's face hardened, his eyes narrowing. "I had no choice. They were going to use me, control me. I had to do it to survive." The truth was spilling out now, raw and painful. Clark wasn't just a victim of an accident. He was a man trapped in a dangerous game of power and lies. His family, his own flesh and blood, had been manipulating him, using him as a pawn in a deadly game for control over their vast fortune. Clark had made a decision that would haunt him forever, and now it was coming back to destroy him and everyone around him. Evelyn's smile returned, but it was far from friendly. "You think you can escape your past, Clark. You can't run forever, and neither can she." She pointed a sharp finger at Jessica. "You're just a distraction, a pawn, a temporary solution for his guilt." Clark's eyes flashed with anger. "You don't get to talk about her like that." The room was charged with electricity now, a volatile mix of emotions and revelations. Jessica was caught in the middle of it all, but something inside her had shifted. This wasn't just about money or power anymore. It was about survival, about standing up to the people who used and manipulated those they claimed to love. Without warning, Clark turned to Jessica, his eyes filled with urgency. "You need to leave. Right now. They won't stop coming after us. You'll be in danger if you stay. Please, Jessica, just go." But Jessica stood her ground, shaking her head. "I'm not leaving you to face this alone. You may have made mistakes, but I believe in you. You're more than this." For the first time, Clark looked vulnerable, his mask cracking completely. His eyes softened, and he nodded slowly. "You don't know what you're asking, but..." "Thank you." But just as they seemed to be on the brink of something that could change everything, a loud crash from downstairs shattered the moment. Footsteps pounded on the stairs, and Evelyn's smile widened. "They're here," she said, almost gleefully. "You really thought you could outrun this, Clark? It's over." Jessica's heart raced. The weight of everything suddenly became too much. The danger wasn't just outside. It was closing in from every direction. Evelyn was right. Clark had run out of time. The enemies he had betrayed, the family who wanted to control him, were here now, and they were not going to stop until everything fell apart. But just as the door to the room slammed open, Jessica made a decision. She wasn't just going to stand by and watch it all unfold. She ran toward the door, grabbing Clark's arm and pulling him toward the window. They had no time to waste. She wasn't sure how they'd escape, but she knew they had to do it together. As the sounds of footsteps drew nearer, they leaped out the window, the cold air rushing past them as they landed on the soft grass below. Clark winced in pain but steadied himself, his face set with determination. Jessica didn't look back as they ran, their only focus on getting away. In that moment, Jessica realized something that would stick with her forever. Sometimes, the greatest risks lead to the biggest rewards. Not just in terms of money or power, but in trust, courage, and the connections we make with others. She had entered this story thinking she was just a caretaker, but now she was part of something far bigger, a fight for survival and redemption. They didn't know what the future held, but they knew they would face it together. And for the first time in a long while, Jessica felt that maybe, just maybe, there was hope after all.